When I started my public life, I understood the media might be interested in what I did. I realized then their attention would inevitably focus on both our private and public lives.
Paris, France, August 31st, 1997. It is a warm summer night in the city of love. At the back door of the Ritz Hotel, 4 people get into a black Mercedes sedan. One of those people is the most famous woman in the world, Princess Diana. In just a few minutes, something is about to happen that will change the world forever. But what happened in Paris that night? Join us as we uncover the conspiracy theories that could point to an alternative and much more sinister explanation for the tragic death of Princess Diana.
I naturally assumed that it had been a terrible accident, but subsequently, everything that happened made me believe that it wasn't an accident, and that it was a conspiracy.
We don't have all the facts. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Some pieces are missing, and maybe they'll always be missing.
I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death.
I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become, nor the extent to which it would affect both my public duties and my personal life.
Now there is confirmation that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died. She died at 4 a.m. after going into cardiac arrest. That, according to doctors at the hospital in Paris, Diana, Princess of Wales, is dead.
We have reports from Paris that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident.
I feel like everyone else in this country today, utterly devastated. Our thoughts and prayers are with Princess Diana's family. We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief that is so deeply painful for us. She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain, throughout the world, with joy and with comfort. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
There are lots of unanswered questions of what happened in Paris on that night.
Those close to Princess Diana described her behavior in the months leading up to her death as paranoid and full of fear. They claim that she believed British Secret Service operatives working for MI5 and MI6 were plotting to murder her.
I and many other people thought she was paranoid. Many times she'd say to me, "Look underneath the car, Paul. Is there anything unusual under there?" But then we'd pull up the floorboards, looking for bugging devices. "Can you see any wires? Are they hidden? Take that plug off the wall, unscrew the plug and have a look inside." Sometimes it's in the telephone, she'd say. We'd take the telephone to bits to see if we could see something which didn't belong inside the telephone. Then she was met by someone in MI6 who told her that it's possible to beam something from a satellite into a room and can be deflected from a mirror and listen to a conversation. Now, to me, way back then, 20 years ago, sounds like James Bond. It sounds like fiction. But I'm sure there's someone out there that can tell you, actually, that's fact.
Muhammad Al-Fayed, father of Dodi Fayed, Diana's lover, who also died in the crash, is certain there are too many mysteries surrounding the incident.
I am the father who lost his son, and I'm the only person who knows exactly what happened. I know the threats Diana have. The CIA, FBI, NSA have done nothing to assist my efforts. Instead, they have done everything possible to delay. That Diana, 6 months before she murdered, already Lord Mitcham have put a complaint saying exactly what's going to happen to her, that she's going to be murdered in a car. And nobody done nothing to protect her because they know they're planning to do what they have done to my son and to her.
Under English law, an inquest is required in cases of sudden or unexplained death. The inquest into the death of Diana and Dodi Fayed opened on January 8, 2007, with Lord Justice Scott Baker acting as deputy coroner. On April 7, 2008, the jury decided that Princess Diana had been unlawfully killed by the grossly negligent driving of Henri Paul. To this day, there are many people who don't believe or accept the verdict of unlawful killing.
We think that the whole thing was perverse, and it demonstrates once again the cover-up that has gone on, not only in France, but the UK, and I dare to say the United States.
The crash was in the early hours of Sunday morning. The London Evening Paper on Monday, which was published at about 10 o'clock in the morning, had a headline, "Drunk as a Skunk," and claimed that the car was traveling at 120 miles an hour, 180 kilometers an hour, claimed that the speedometer was stuck at that speed, claimed that the driver was 3 times over the legal limit. At that stage, on that Monday, they hadn't even analyzed the blood samples allegedly taken from Henri Paul. It was established at the British inquest that the car was only going 60 miles an hour. Of course, that's fast, but it's not 120 miles an hour, which would have been mad. There was no question of the speedometer being stopped at 180 kilometers an hour. That only happens in very bad films. It was all untrue. And from then on, everything that happened led me to believe that it was a conspiracy.
Ever since the tragic death of Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed on the night of August 31, 1997, many people have doubted the official version of events. Paul Burrell was Princess Diana's confidant and butler for 10 years. He claims that the princess would still be alive today if the British royal family didn't abandon her after her divorce from Prince Charles.
Because they let go of her and abandoned her, she was let loose in a strange world that was dangerous, and there was nobody taking care of her. So in that way, it was a bad thing. Although she was able to do whatever she wanted, she wasn't protected. And that led to her death. The princess tried to make her marriage work, and she never actually wanted a divorce. She said, "I'll have a separation, but I don't want to be divorced. For the children's sake, I want us to remain a family unit, to bring them up as parents." But the Queen wouldn't hear of it. The Queen wrote to Princess Diana and said, For the sake of the monarchy and the country and the church, we think it's best if you and Charles divorce. The princess was furious. She says, this is my marriage, not theirs. It's nothing to do with the church. It's to do with me and Charles and the children. In the very end, she had to succumb to a divorce.
Well, Will, when you turned on.
Your patron has never been happier to see you. Whatever uncertainties the last few weeks may have brought, I want you to be certain of this. Our work together will continue unchanged. Especially now, as Christmas brings its own painful stresses to so many people in need. The sick, the old, the handicapped, and the homeless, the lonely, the confused, and the simply unloved, who are needing your help more than ever.
I was with her for 10 years in total and began traveling with her around the world, to Angola, to Bosnia, to far-reach countries, searching out people who were less fortunate than we were, people who needed their plight heightened by an incredible icon of our times.
I think we ought to retire gracefully.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning. Were you surprised at the political furore that developed as a result of your visit to Angola?
I saw it merely as a distraction because I'm not a political figure. I am a humanitarian figure, and always have been and always will be.
We will concentrate, of course, on dissemination.
It's been a very intensive 4 days. I have seen a great deal. I've seen the people affected by landmines. I've seen the landmines themselves. Angola is an example of what the Red Cross can achieve around the world, given the sort of cooperation that we have seen that exists between the Red Cross and the NGOs and the Angolan authorities.
I remember going to a hospital in Bosnia where a little girl had been blown up by a landmine. She'd been into the field to retrieve her brother's football, and she'd been blown up and lost her legs. She was critically ill, and the princess sat by her bed and held her hand, and this little girl couldn't understand English. And the princess left. The little girl opened her eyes and said to the nurse in her language, "I've just seen an angel." That one moment of humanity changed my life, and I saw the princess in a different light. I saw her as beautiful inside as she was on the outside.
That summer of 1997, Diana had spent with Dodi and the Fayed family, escaping the hounding paparazzi, touring the Mediterranean on the Fayed family yacht. Since her divorce from Prince Charles in 1996, tabloids had speculated about Diana's alleged romances. When a photographer caught the couple embracing, the picture was sold to a British newspaper for almost £250,000.
Did you know that the romance of the princess and Dodi Fayed was 30 days from beginning to end? It only lasted 30 days. I said to the princess, "When are you coming home?" "I'm coming home on Sunday, Paul. I'm just bored. I'm on this boat. It's freezing cold downstairs. It's boiling hot on deck. I'm sending these pictures out and nobody's coming back to me. I'm having no communication. I need to come home. But the only way home is on the Harrods jet. The only way I can get home is via Paris, because Dodi has to go to Paris to do some business for his father. How is he with you? Oh, he's very spoiling. He's very generous, the princess said. He's given me a necklace, some earrings. He's given me a watch. I said, you know what's coming next, don't you? Do you think so? Oh, yes. He's gonna give you a ring.
Saturday, August 30th, 1997. Diana and Dodi traveled to Paris and planned to stay overnight at the Ritz Hotel, owned by Dodi's billionaire father, Mohammed Al Fayed. Even though the princess was divorced from Prince Charles, she was still entitled to the same level of security as other members of the royal family. Diana chose not to take advantage of their security agents and was being looked after by members of the Al Fayed security team, led by Trevor Rees-Jones.
She knew that the bodyguards who went everywhere with her would be reporting on her movements back to Prince Charles, who she was seeing, where she was going, how long she stayed in this particular house, who she met with, who she spoke to, who she had a cup of coffee with.
Well, Diana didn't want security because that would have meant MI6. She couldn't stand MI6, she loathed them. And she knew exactly what they're up to. They've been bugging her in London for years. They were watching her all the time. She didn't want that, because that's what she'd been getting, them watching her.
And she wasn't prepared for that. Yes, she needed security. She wanted security, but she knew that security came with strings attached, and she wasn't prepared to be tied up in strings by the royal family. She wanted freedom from all that. When her sons went with the Fayeds on holiday, then Scotland Yard detectives went because they were looking after the boys. But as soon as she could be free of them, she was. She wanted to be a free woman again. In a way, they wanted to get rid of her. One of the first things the Queen did was strip her of her honorary title, Her Royal Highness. But they pushed her out, but not completely. And when she was dead, what did they do? They put a standard over her coffin. She then became, in death, a member of the royal family again.
While in Paris, Diana expressed discomfort and made her feelings clear to Paul Burrell that she wanted to return home to London. It is speculated that the reason for their trip to Paris was for Dodi to pick up an engagement ring he had custom designed for her. Many believed that the couple were poised to announce their engagement, and that the impending engagement was something the British royal family could not allow to happen.
I spoke to the princess the day before and made all her plans for her return. Then she rang me from the hotel in Paris and said, "Oh, I'm going to be a little late because I'm in Paris. I've got to be here for Dodi. He has some work to do for his father, and so I'm going to be late. I don't want to be here. I want to come home. So will you arrange everything a day later?" I said, "Yeah, sure, it's no problem." And then she said something very strange. She said, "Promise me you'll be there." I said, "Of course I'll be there. I'm always there." "No, say it." "What do you mean, say it?" I said. She said, "No, say, I promise I'll be there." I said, "Okay, if it makes you feel any better, I promise I'll be there." She said, "That's all I wanted to hear. I want to come home. I'm crawling the walls," she said to me. "I want to come home. I want to see my boys."
Mohammed Al Fayed said that they were talking about, that Dodi had told him that basically he was getting married in November. This was now the end of August, so it was a matter of 8-9 weeks. Tell the kids first, get a few things organised, get married, and off they went. It's pretty obvious that was happening. There's no doubt about it in my mind, none whatsoever. They were definitely getting married.
It would have been most unwelcome to the British royal family and the British establishment for Diana, the mother of the future king, to have married a Muslim. Now, Dodi was a charming and delightful and lovely guy, and he was a Muslim, but in all the years I knew him, the only time I ever knew him go to the mosque was when he was dead for his funeral. He wasn't a militant Islamist, but these people don't think along those lines. They think that had she married a Muslim, and had they had 2 beautiful children, shall we say, a couple of little girls, the newspapers would have been writing about Diana and Dodi and their children. You would have had, in effect, in Britain, an alternative royal family. Now that could not have been allowed. And many people would have said, isn't it charming? Diana, so happy now. Dodi, a nice-looking guy, 2 beautiful children. Aren't they so much more attractive than the gloomy, rather boring Germans who are our royal family? Now that was a risk they couldn't take. And if you think about it, the British Secret Service, SIS, known as MI6, what is their number 1 priority? What is their justification for existence? They're there to counteract militant Islam. What is their motto? To protect the state. And they would have seen, or could have seen, and very well did see, it as a threat that Diana was going to be married to a Muslim. And they didn't know, 1, whether she was pregnant, 2, whether they were coming back to London on the Monday to announce an engagement. Then it would have been too late. Diana rang one journalist who she trusted, Richard Kay of the Daily Mail, to say that she wanted to see Richard Kay when she came back to England because she wanted to tell him something important. Well, we don't know what that was. But Richard, for his part, knows that the princess was sincere about her relationship with Dodi.
August 30th, 1997, 9:30 p.m. Dodi Fayed's plans to take the princess for a romantic meal are ruined as the couple are followed by paparazzi. The couple decided to retreat to a location the paparazzi could not penetrate, the Ritz Hotel. The couple decided to leave the Ritz and head to an apartment owned by Mohammed Al-Fayed, a short distance from the hotel. 12:20 a.m. Henri Paul, the deputy head of security at the Ritz Hotel, had been instructed to drive the hired Mercedes-Benz S280 to elude the paparazzi. A decoy vehicle left the Ritz from the main entrance. Diana and Dodi then departed from the hotel's rear entrance, heading for the apartment. Diana and Dodi were the rear passengers. Trevor Rees-Jones and Henri Paul occupied the front seats. At this point, the paparazzi had caught up with the Mercedes. Henri Paul drove faster to get away from the photographers. Just before Paul headed into the Alma Tunnel, he swerves slightly to avoid a slower car, but grazes the vehicle. The car began to spin out of control. 12:23 a.m. At the speed of around 65 miles per hour, the car slammed into the 13th concrete column inside the Alma Tunnel. What first appears to be a tragic accident slowly develops into a much more sinister event. As the victims lay in the wrecked car, the paparazzi rushed to help while others took pictures. Fayed had been sitting in the left rear seat and appeared to be dead. Fire officers were still trying to resurrect him when he was pronounced dead by a doctor at 1:32 a.m. Henri Paul was declared dead on removal from the wreckage. Still conscious, Trevor Rees-Jones had suffered multiple serious facial injuries. 12:30 a.m. The first police patrol arrived on the scene. 1 a.m. Diana was removed from the car, She then went into cardiac arrest. Following external cardiopulmonary resuscitation, her heart started beating again. 1:18 a.m. She was moved to the ambulance, left the scene at 1:41 a.m., and arrived at the hospital at 2:06 a.m. 4 a.m. Princess Diana was pronounced dead. There are contrasting reports from those who witnessed what happened that fateful night. Some say they saw a bright flash occur inside the tunnel just before the crash. Other witnesses claim to have seen no such light. Richard Tomlinson, a former MI6 agent, believes that what happened in the Alma tunnel was a meticulously planned assassination, using a method that had previously been generated by MI6 in order to assassinate the former president of Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic.
When the accident first happened, it didn't really occur to me that it was in any way related, but what made me realise very, very strongly was that a witness report that there was a very bright light in the tunnel. And as soon as I heard that, that made me click two and two things together. I think, oh, that is exactly one of the proposals that was used in the Milosevic document. And the combination of the bright light and the tunnel made me think straight away, well, maybe it wasn't an accident.
He was sacked in 1995 because I think he's considered to be basically a guy with too much integrity to work for the British security services. He was quite clear about what he's seen while he was working for MI6. There was a plan, again proven at the inquest, to murder Slobodan Milosevic, the president of Serbia, when he was driving into a tunnel, into a Geneva tunnel, in fact, and the points mentioned in this, that Richard remembered quite well, was we're going to lead his car to be driven into a pillar inside the tunnel. And they were going to use strobe light to disorientate the driver to make sure he drove into the pillar in the tunnel. This was only a few years before, and it was archived, it was kept by MI6. Why would it be kept by MI6? As they had maybe some use for it later? This was actually mentioned after Diana's murder to the French authorities. MI6 denied it. They lied to the French authorities and admitted in the court that they had lied to them. Richard, interestingly enough, tried to give evidence after this had taken place. He went to try and get back into France. He was arrested. He was sent to prison for 1 year for breaching the Official Secrets Act. Spent 5 months of the sentence in prison, trying to stop him from getting over there. Came out of prison, went to France and tried again. Then he went to the States. He was invited by NBC, a show I've been on, to New York. He was arrested by the CIA at the airport, John F. Kennedy Airport, not allowed to leave the airport, and then he was put back on a flight to come back over to Geneva, where he'd flown from initially. Fortunately, he didn't catch the flight that had been booked for him, because that plane left John F. Kennedy Airport and blew up mid-air.
One aspect of the Princess Diana death that has kept many theorists wondering is the driver of the white Fiat Uno that was spotted by many eyewitnesses leaving the Alma tunnel moments after the crash. On May 5, 2000, police in the south of France found a badly burned body inside the wreckage of a car deep in the woods near Nantes. The body was so charred that it took police nearly a month before DNA tests confirmed that the dead man, James Anderson, a 54-year-old millionaire photographer who was among the paparazzi stalking Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed during the week before their deaths. A fire officer who was at the scene of Anderson's death claimed to have seen what looked like 2 bullet holes in James Anderson's head. The official story was that Anderson had committed suicide, as his wife had been unfaithful. From the day of the crash in the Alma Tunnel, James Anderson had been at the center of the controversy.
James Anderson had bought lots of fuel, spare fuel, put in the back of the car, had gone inside the car, shot himself twice in the head, and then set his body on fire with fuel so the body was destroyed, it was cremated. A French judge said, suicide. Utter nonsense. The judge at the inquest made the point that it wasn't appropriate to talk to Christophe Pellat, who was the French fireman from Montpellier who discovered and witnessed Anderson's body in the car and who described the bullet holes in his head.
At least 7 eyewitnesses to the crash said that they saw a white Fiat Uno and a motorcycle speed out of the tunnel seconds after the crash. Forensic tests have confirmed that a white Fiat Uno collided with the Mercedes carrying Diana and Dodi, and that the collision was a significant factor in the crash. According to witnesses, motorcycles and the white Fiat Uno fled the crash scene, and French police claim they've been unable to locate the vehicle or identify the drivers or the passengers.
And you know something? The French have never found the Fiat Uno. Never. I tell you, if you and I tried to make a car disappear, we could not do it. There would always be a trace of that car somewhere, in a scrapyard or in the bottom of a lake or wherever it happened to be, at the bottom of a cliff. That car disappeared and the French have never found it. Well, do tell me how that can possibly happen.
First of all, the police said they looked for it, couldn't find it. Mohammed Al-Fayed's team found the car in February, just after the attack. They found that it had been used, it had been claimed to have been used as chicken hutch. That it was on bricks. None of that was true. The car was for sale in the October, just a short while after the murder, in a garage. Mohammed Al-Fayed tried to buy it, presumably for further forensic examination. He wasn't allowed for safety reasons. Now, we don't know for whose safety reasons, but we can probably guess at that too.
That car was examined, and the original paint from that car exactly matched the paint on the Mercedes. The bumper sample on the Mercedes again matched that from the Fiat. But still, nothing was done by the French police.
There was one particular informer for SIS whose normal daytime job was, of course, working as a paparazzi photographer, but occasionally he was used to do other things. And I believe that he was involved at that stage.
He was known to have been bragging about being in the tunnel that night. He was bragging with several of his friends, one of whom was a guy called Frederick Dard, a famous French crime writer, who's happened to die of a heart attack 6 weeks after James Anderson was found with 2 bullets in his head. It's known that Anderson was talking about being in the tunnel, what his activities have been, what he'd been doing. He said he had photographs that was rock the world.
Ever since the crash, it has been widely debated whether or not the man behind the wheel, Henri Paul, was intoxicated. Blood samples taken from Henri Paul showed mysteriously high levels of carbon monoxide, the Diana inquest heard. The percentage of toxins in his system was so abnormally excessive that the Frenchman should have been suffering symptoms, including headaches and nausea. Yet hours before his death, Mr. Paul was captured on CCTV at the Ritz Hotel, parking his car, walking around and communicating with people. Mohammed Al-Fayed is convinced the blood samples were switched as part of the cover-up.
They had to make out he was drunk. This would have to be blamed for what had happened. So, paparazzi, a drunken driver. Case closed, hopefully. It was definitely not paparazzi. We know that for facts. It was SAS and SBS troops. And he wasn't drunk. They had to make out that he was, because the focus had to come on either the paparazzi, so they arrested a lot of them, so they could go on blaming them. And then also, where they had Henri Paul as being the drunken driver, they could always focus on him.
His blood sample showed a reading of 30% carbon monoxide. Now, that is the poison that people generally ingest from the exhaust fumes of a car. But if you had ingested 30% carbon monoxide, you wouldn't be able to function. Henri Paul was filmed immediately before the crash, running up and down stairs, interacting with people, bending down to do up his shoes, talking to people up close, Diana and Dodi and the bodyguards. He certainly didn't look like a man who was drunk or was acting in anything like a drunken way.
To me, it's fairly obvious what happened. They used the body of a recently acquired corpse, some poor devil who committed suicide, gassing himself in his car, which we know did happen. A person couldn't even stand or even stay awake with this amount of carbon monoxide in the blood. So where did that come from? Then they try to make out that, it was because when the bags in front of the car exploded as the bodies drove into the smash of the tunnel, that he would have breathed all this carbon monoxide. There isn't any carbon monoxide in those bags at all. When the fire engines got there, they said there was no presence of carbon monoxide whatsoever. And then that was scotched as well completely. So it's pretty much a guarantee that this poor fellow who's committed suicide had his blood used, a very fresh corpse, so he could use the blood as an example, as a sample, to say this is the guy's blood, he's full of alcohol, carbon monoxide, well, put that to one side, slightly inconvenience, and this is the guy who's just driven the car and murdered Diana Spencer. Rubbish.
So those blood samples were switched. Even in the inquest, the coroner had to admit that it could not be explained, this 30% carbon monoxide. There are a lot of things, when you're doing a cover-up, you can't cover everything.
The sudden and tragic events of that fateful night in Paris devastated and shocked people all over the world, and the trauma of that event still remains as a scar. Many people believe that the jury's subsequent verdict of unlawful killing simply doesn't add up. Soon after the crash, conflicting reports were released regarding the state of Princess Diana directly after the crash. Some stating that she was not badly hurt, and others stating she was severely injured. One member of the chasing paparazzi that night, Rimaud Rott, was known to have entered the vehicle after the crash and spoken with Diana, telling her help is on the way. The first call to the emergency services was logged at 12:26 a.m. The ambulance carrying the princess arrived at La Pitié-Salpêtrière at 2:06 a.m. The amount of time it took for the ambulance to reach the hospital has since been scrutinized by many theorists.
When I got to Paris, I was told that the ambulance took an hour to get from the scene of the accident to the hospital, which is only 5 minutes away. What happened in that time? Where did the ambulance go, and what happened inside the ambulance?
In this country, in America, scoop and shoot. You scoop up the patient from the scene of the crash and you take them as fast as you can to the best equipped nearby emergency room. In this case, that did not happen.
All I can tell you is what I saw. And when I got to Paris, I was handed a see-through plastic bag of what were the princess's clothes in which she died. And I couldn't tell if they were clothes because the bag was just full of blood. What happened inside that ambulance must have been a massacre.
It took an amazing hour to get to a hospital 4 miles away, and on the way there, they drove past 2 other hospitals which could quite easily have treated her. Now, any accident specialist, trauma specialist, will say the best place for a patient to be is in a hospital, because only there would they have been able to detect fully the extent of her internal injuries. Why that wasn't done? I mean, even at the gates of the hospital, they stopped for a number of minutes before taking her inside.
Who made those decisions? And what actually happened? What did they do?
None of this makes sense. And I wouldn't want it to happen to anybody's child or to themselves, because you just pull your hair out in anguish that this wasn't done.
Many eyewitnesses claim to have seen numerous cars and bikes surrounding the Mercedes as it entered the Alma tunnel. Some witnesses also claim to have seen a white Fiat Uno purposefully collide with the Mercedes. Alon Power is in no doubt as to who he thinks was chasing the Mercedes that night.
There were witnesses who saw various things. Some saw the car flying down with no bikes around them at all. Others saw cars and bikes suddenly appearing close to the Alma tunnel, not having fallen down. A lady, perhaps the most important of all, called Suat Mufakir, who was one of the witnesses, actually went into the tunnel just about the same sort of time. She was ahead of the Mercedes, and the Fiat just rammed inside in front of between her and the Mercedes. She saw the flash of light, got the flash of light. They accelerated away to try and avoid any car hitting them. They heard this crunch and bang behind, and she said that she saw some lights way back at the other side of the tunnel, approaching the tunnel. And when she was asked again later on at the inquest how far behind, she said far, far behind. Those would have been the paparazzi coming behind, which is what they wanted. They wanted the paparazzi there so they could blame them. Assassins, SAS, SBS troops on their bikes do the job, gone in seconds. It's all done. People also waiting in the tunnel on the side to come over and make sure the coup de grace is administered if she isn't already gone. Of course, Henri Paul was already dead. Dodi was dead. Trevor Rhys-Jones wasn't. So their main focus was, I think, my gut feel is they didn't know that Trevor Rhys-Jones was still alive. They were focusing on Diana. She was still alive. And there was a note saying they also spotted a red mark inside her thigh, which could have been an injection going into her as well. So all they had to do was a quick injection and out, knowing that she'd be dead within hours.
One would expect that with the financial means Dodi Fayed and Princess Diana had at their disposal, there was absolutely no reason why they should have been chauffeured in a vehicle that was snatched at gunpoint a few months prior to the fateful night. But that's precisely what happened. This fact on its own is perhaps at best nothing more than a coincidence. But where the event turns decidedly strange is how that very Mercedes was returned a few days earlier in pristine condition, except for one very important aspect. The onboard computer chip was missing. The onboard computer chip controls, amongst other things, navigation, acceleration, steering and braking of the vehicle. Considering the princess's death was due to a car crash, the fact that the Mercedes S280 involved in the crash had its onboard computer chip stolen some days earlier pushed the pervasive accident account into firmer conspiracy theory.
It's known the brake lights were flickering on the car before it left the Ritz Hotel. We don't know about the seatbelts, whether they were made inoperable. We don't know about that. But we know that certainly afterwards, Mercedes offered to come and inspect the car on behalf of the investigation 3 times. We said, no, thank you very much indeed, each time. And they could have just determined whether the seatbelts were inoperative, brakes had been tampered with, any explosion taking place inside the car. It would become public knowledge. The answer was no. The remains of the car were locked off in a police compound, came back to the UK 7 years later, now absolutely in bits, nothing available to investigate really.
Another occurrence that has caused suspicion, especially amongst the Al Fayed family, are the circumstances in which Princess Diana's body was embalmed. Mohammed Al Fayed alleged that Diana's body was deliberately embalmed shortly after her death to ensure that any pregnancy test at the post-mortem would produce a false result.
The discovery that Princess Diana's body was embalmed in Paris within hours of her death. What reason can there be other than it was part of cover-up to prevent proper forensic test in the UK?
In this case, there was no permission given. It was just authorized by a fairly low-ranking British diplomat who happened to be there. The effect of embalming her and drenching the corpse in formaldehyde was that it meant that any tests were nullified. They had no value whatsoever.
The royal family are embalmed, but usually by the royal undertakers in London. So when the princess got back to London, the Queen's physician and the princess's physician attended her body, and they did say to me there was nothing they could do. Everything had been done. So they didn't have any answers. All the answers are in Paris.
We do know that Dr. Dion, Dr. Elizabeth Dion, whom I've spoken with again, and all these witnesses I've been to see and spoken to, she saw the fetus in Diana's corpse. Now, I have to be careful what I say here because I don't want to get Dr. Dion into any serious trouble. And she wouldn't, none of the witnesses would cooperate really at all. They like living. But Dr. Dion, when I was talking to her, made an interesting point. She was talking about working in a hospital in San Francisco. And we know that eventually she did. But my question was, well, what happened on the night in question? Where were you? How was you, someone said you saw the fetus in Diana's womb. And then she just didn't actually answer it, but kept on talking about being in San Francisco. Same way as the police couldn't find her. It took me 9 days to find her. I didn't have a police force behind me. And then they couldn't find her, but then they had to because a journalist indicated where she was. They had to go and get an affidavit. They did. The affidavit didn't mention pregnancy and didn't mention being in Paris at all. It just mentioned that she was working in San Francisco and no mention of the fetus. So I said, well, you know, basically, how is it that you could have seen this or made this comment? And she said to me, interesting. She said, well, in any case, it must be a problem with it. It must be I wasn't on the rota that night. I thought, you're working in San Francisco, but you weren't on a French rota. Why? Why would you be on a French rota if you're working in San Francisco? I didn't press it. She saw the fetus in Diana's womb. Diana was pregnant.
I think the question is not really was she pregnant, but more relevantly, did some people think she might be? And was that the reason why this extraordinary decision was taken? You know, there's so much about this that does not make sense unless you see it as some form of cover-up, conspiracy to conceal the truth. And certainly there's much evidence of that. And certainly the princess herself believed that her life was in danger. Diana was a very sensible person. She may not have passed a lot of exams, but she was not, as she said, as thick as two short planks. She was very astute, she was very streetwise, and she firmly believed that her calls were being bugged. There was evidence for it. Her conversation with James Gilby, so-called Squidgygate, that was not only bugged, it was recorded and it was broadcast.
Perhaps the most apparent display of her paranoia was a letter in which she wrote to Paul Burrell, predicting the manner in which she would die. The letter was written in 1993, 10 months after her separation from Prince Charles was announced.
The letter, even today, is rather chilling. to read in her own hand. It is spooky, beyond spooky. And when I first read it, I asked her about it, and she said, well, you know my fears. You know we're always checking for things under the car. You know that I think I'm being bugged. She said, this is just an extension of that. And I just fear that I'm not going to live very long, that they all want rid of me. It goes back to her lack of self-confidence too. Never really fitting in, not really being wanted. And I think that speaks volumes about the woman and her insecurities.
Diana was so concerned about the possibility of being murdered, she went to see her solicitor in 1995, Victor Mishcon. At the time, Mishcon was the most respected solicitor in the whole of London. In the meeting with Mishcon, Diana expressed her fears and concerns about the possibility of her death. She especially mentioned her husband wanted her out of the picture and that he was planning a motor accident. The day after the meeting, Victor Mishcon made a handwritten note of everything Diana had told him, and also consulted with Diana's private secretary, who stated he could understand why Diana felt so concerned for her safety.
Diana, 6 months before she murdered, already Lord Mitcham have put a complaint saying exactly what's going to happen to her, that she's going to be murdered in a car. And nobody done nothing to protect her, because they know they're planning to do what they have done to my son and to her.
When Condon retired and John Stevens became the police commissioner, Condon gave the Mishcon note to Stevens, and he did the same thing. He locked it in a safe. They kept it quiet. Under English law, it is a crime not to tell a coroner if you have information about the sudden, unexplained, or suspicious death of somebody. By law, you have to tell them. To conceal it is a crime. That note stayed in the safe at Scotland Yard until Paul Burrell, 5 years after the princess had been killed, sold the Burrell note to the Daily Mirror. And when they published something very, very similar to the Mishcon note, only at that stage did Scotland Yard make the coroner aware that the princess had predicted the means of her death and how the tragedy would happen.
During the inquest, Michael Mansfield QC was asking the question of Lord Condon, Paul Condon, saying, if you were told, Lord Condon, that you were given a note written by a victim that 2 years before the offence or the body was found on a beach, that one day she would be walking along that beach and she expected to be pushed over the cliff. When you were handed the note to say this is exactly what was going to happen, would you perhaps decide or think there might be something worth investigating? Lord Condon's reply was, it depends. Not, of course, not, yes, the job as a police officer. No, it depends. Depends on what? Depends on whether he wants the truth or not.
It's very convenient for a lot of people that Diana, Princess of Wales, is no longer here.
No one who knew Diana will ever forget her. Millions of others who never met her, but felt they knew her, will remember her. I share in your determination to cherish her memory.
Now, over 2 decades on from this tragedy that shook the world, there still remains too many unanswered questions, too many coincidences, too many mysteries for anyone to truly conclude what really happened in Paris that night.